Hello everyone, my name is Kerry Ramirez and I am the Managing Director of Studymove. Thank you for joining this, our third key data update of 2023. And in this key data update, we're going to talk about fees. In particular, we're going to talk about the 2023 international fees for Australian universities. And this session in particular and this analysis, we actually call it the big adjustment. This year, with better market conditions, this is when we can finally see the pricing position that universities are taking and how they are engaging from a pricing point of view with international applicants. Now, to put things in context, as I explained before, for many universities around the world, COVID put some very significant challenges. And the settling of pricing during COVID was extremely difficult, simply because we have a lot of uncertainties that we had to deal with. In fact, here in Australia, we identified that about a third of universities actually did not change their international fees for about 2 years, which means that in 2023, the adjustment that they have to do to set their fees, it was actually quite big. And for that reason, we have been very keen to look at the data just to have a better understanding of what's happening and how is the result of these big adjustments that universities are taking in this particular year. So there are a lot of challenges behind the settling of prices. And we believe that the use of data has been extremely useful just to have a better understanding on how we can actually set prices and set fees more effectively. So at Studymove, we have been collecting data on fees for 7 years. And basically, we have one of the most comprehensive data sets of fees here in Australia. It basically looks at all the information of all the programs who are offered for international students. And then, of course, we analyze, we classify, we clean the data. We put a lot of work into providing universities with the right set of reports. And universities look at this data set in 3 different ways. There are 3 different ways in which universities purchase this data. One is that some universities, they actually use a complete data set and they drill down into program level just to make the analysis and to have enough key information just to set their fees for future years. Some other universities, they look for a more of a summarized kind of version of the data. And for them, we actually have a tailor-made report that we actually develop for each institution, where you can actually see the position that your institution has based on the average annual international fee at different levels like undergraduate, master coursework, and also 11 different discipline areas. So it's quite a comprehensive report that allows you just to see the summary of what are the changes and what the position that each university has from a pricing point of view in this particular year. And finally, to complement it, we actually have a third report that actually looks at the relationship between the rankings and the fees. We know that there is a strong relationship between these 2 variables, and for that reason, we look at the overall position of the university from a ranking point of view and the relationship that they have on a fee point of view. And we look also at 11 different discipline areas so we can have a broad understanding on the relationship between fees and rankings. And today we're using the information from these 3 tools just to provide you with some of the main findings on our analysis of 2023 international fees for Australian universities. So today we're going to cover information like what's the average annual fee across different programs, how universities are positioned themselves differently to what we have seen in previous years, what are the changes and especially the increments that we have seen in fees for this year? What are the changes that we have seen for some key discipline areas? And finally, what are the factors that we have identified that can influence the pricing and the selling of fees for the next few years? So let me just start with the main trends. Basically what we have seen as some of the main results in terms of fees this year. We reached 2023 with a completely different environment to what we have seen previously during the time of COVID. As I said before, during COVID, it was very hard for universities just to effectively look at the pricing position that they were trying to achieve. We have been massive uncertainties, and this is the very first time that we have seen some favorable market condition which allow universities just to have a better understanding and a better scope or basically to decide where they wanna and how they wanna price themselves. And for that reason, it was very important and very interesting just to see this set of data because we finally have clarity or where everybody is in relationship to their fees against other Australian universities. So after we collect the data, we crunch the numbers, we categorize all the information, we identify a very interesting story for this year. Now, this year is the first year that, as everybody was expected, we saw a significant increase in the international fees. Because as simple as this, it was, for some universities, time to catch up. And for other universities as well, they saw better market conditions. Now, this chart actually explains this phenomenon quite clearly. This chart basically gives you the average increase across all universities and programs at all study levels that we have experienced in the last few years. Before COVID, universities were actually on average increasing their fees on an annual rate of about between 4 and 5%. Now, these years were extraordinarily good years for the university sector here in Australia. Now, of course, 2021 and 2022 even were actually very different years. Because during that time, and especially because we had closing borders or borders closed, universities, as I've been saying, having had the difficulty just to increase their fees. And also, in many cases, I think universities acknowledged that it was not the time just to increase their fees because they were not providing the complete experience to international applicants. A lot of them, they were doing courses online. So as a result of that, the majority of universities in Australia actually put their brakes in their increasing on fees. Now, 2023, as I said, is a very different story. Now we are pretty much back to normal, and there is again demand for international programs or for programs offered by Australian universities. And a lot of universities, they could actually foresee that and they adjust their fees. And that's how we, in 2023, we have seen an average increase in fees of 3.5%. Now, this is the big numbers. And what I think is also quite interesting is just to see how universities have reacted this year in terms of how they're actually increasing their fees or not. What you're looking at the screen, or what I'm showing on the screen at the moment, is basically the increase or the decrease in the average international fees that each university had. This is in 2022. And as you can see here, back in 2002, last year, still we had a lot of uncertainties when the 2022 international fees were actually set. Back in 2022, we had a large number of universities, in fact, half of universities with a decrease in fees or with a reduction of less than 1%. It was about 15 universities last year that had a small increase, and also only 5 universities who have increases actually higher than 4%. Now, that's last year. And as you can imagine, things have changed significantly for 2023. So let me just show you what happened this year. This is a 2023 chart, basically. And as you can see from, let me go back to 2022, from the vast majority of universities being on purple, now we actually see that the vast majority of universities are actually adjusting their fees in the blue and the green areas. It was actually only 6 universities that had an increase of less than 1%. And the vast majority of universities are readjusting it. This makes complete sense because we're in a completely different environment than the ones that we had before COVID. Also very interesting is that 14 universities actually increased their fees more than 4%, which is more than the average that we already presented it. And this is the result, once again, of many universities catching up after a couple of years of being unable really just to set their pricing effectively. Now, what I think is very, very, very interesting is that this readjustment, this big readjustment, is significantly changing the position that universities have from a pricing point of view. And this is when I think universities is going to be very important that they are aware where they are actually sitting from a pricing point of view. And let me just give you an example of that. A good example is when we actually look at the position that universities have from a pricing point of view, and this is obviously using the average international fees. So this is just, an average metric that really helps us just to understand where everybody is at. And what I'm going to show you on the screen is basically that change that universities have since 2018 and where we are at the moment. Now, for example, University of Sydney traditionally has been they had traditionally since 2018 the highest international average annual international fee. And as a result of that, if you rank universities based on that pricing position, they have been consistently being number one. Now, if we see the second group, you start to see some of the changes that universities experience as a result of COVID and where we are at the moment. For example, interesting just to see ANU, which before COVID, they were in the second highest annual international fee. And because of COVID, they were affected. And now they are back in 2023 at the position that they were before COVID. University of Western Australia, with a similar story, they were placed 11. And then it was just a change in their position. And now they are back to number 10. And then Adelaide, who was number 5, is going back to number 5 again. But University of Queensland, who was number 4, now they're actually in number 6. Now, it seems that it's not a lot of changes, but a lot of changes have been in the other group of universities. And this is what I think is very important that we look into it. Let me just change this. Let's just switch this off. For example, James Cook University was number 13, now is number 15. We also have Deakin, who was number 20 before COVID, now is number 16. So a big change in the pricing position that the university have. University of Tasmania from 24 now is on 17. We also have seen big changes in universities like Flinders, they were 26 and now they are 18. And also a very interesting example is Curtin, who they were 12 and now they are at 22. Now, I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that having a higher position or a lower position is good or bad. And in fact, it could be a strategy that some universities are actually follow. What I think is very important is that we all need to be aware that as a result of this big adjustment, now the relative position that universities have from a fee point of view has changed. And what you can call from a pricing point of view, and I'm going to be clear with it, from a pricing point of view, what you can consider a competitor, it will be very different, most likely now, than what you had back in 2019 and 2018. So it has been a lot of changes, and I think it's going to be very important that universities look into what happened as a result of this big adjustment. And I'm saying this also because pricing, as we all know, is a very important part of the decision-making process of international applicants. In other sectors, pricing always plays a role. But for example, if you think about a convenience store, we all go to a convenience store because that's what it is. It's convenient. We don't care too much of paying a premium or not because we're actually looking for just that convenient part of it. Here in Australia, I think everybody goes to Bunnings warehouse because of the range of products they have. They said that lowest prices are just the beginning, but it's mainly because we go for other reasons. Now, in international education, pricing plays an important role. And in my opinion, international applicants tend to look for what it's around the budget that I have, they look at that university or the universities that are in that price range, and based on that make decisions. So for that reason, it's very important to look at what happened as a result of this big adjustment and see who is basically playing in the same neighborhood that you are from a pricing point of view. So I think that's one of the big lessons that we are getting as a result of this 2023 analysis of fees. Now, of course, this analysis that I present is based on the average international fee. And things could be different when you look at your programs for each discipline areas. And I think it's important that universities basically do the additional analysis and look what happened in each one of the discipline areas of the programs that you are offering, just to see also how these big adjustments have changed by each discipline area or that program that is important for you. And what we have seen in terms of changes by discipline areas are basically based on the chart that you see on the screen now. I should highlight that in the last 3 years, health has been the area that we have seen with the highest growth. It was actually the one with the highest growth in 2022, in 2021. Once again, it's on the top 5. But what it was quite interesting, and this shows that obviously we're in a very different environment, it was IT and engineer. These programs, we noticed that it has been a big adjustments once again, especially with engineer, which suffer a lot because with when borders were closed, basically universities were even unable just to teach some of these programs to international students and also to attract international students. So these are the areas where we also have seen a more important or a larger adjustment in comparison to previous years. So I just invite you that when you are looking at your own analysis of fees, look also at certain discipline areas because we noticed that there has been some changes at that level as well. Okay? All right. So I think it's important also just to acknowledge that market conditions have changed and people, I think, in general, universities are feeling more comfortable in how they are settling their pricing. But there are other factors that I think we all need to highlight that definitely are in everybody's head that I think we all need to consider. Of course, one of them is scholarships, and we actually had a key data update a couple of weeks ago talking about our analysis of scholarships. Scholarships, they play an important role on the effective price that some candidates actually pay for their degree. Also, we know that the university ranking plays an important role. We also are starting to look into how the study level could actually be affecting and how the study mode, and I'm talking about online degrees versus off or on-campus degrees, would actually change certain pricing positions. So let me take you through each one of these ones. Starting with scholarships, and if you haven't seen it, I really invite you just to see that key data update that gives you a very comprehensive look of what we identify in the world of scholarships is happening in Australia. But I think the big highlights are these. In 2003, the role of scholarships are still quite active, and we have noticed that Australian universities are actively engaging in this particular area. But the way in which everybody's, not everybody, but universities are actually engaging is a little bit different. The number of fee waiver scholarships has been reduced significantly. And now universities are looking more into presenting the scholarships for new international students under a merit-based scholarships. Now, I also want to say that by no means I'm saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that I think it's important that we are aware that when we're thinking about pricing, number one, scholarships are still playing an important role. And number two, the way in which universities are engaging in this particular channel is through merit scholarships. Now, also in this topic of a scholarship, what is quite interesting is that now we are moving away from scholarships that basically apply for every single candidate to more country-specific scholarships. In fact, 60% of Australian universities are now using country-specific scholarships. And as you can see in the chart, this is the list of the top markets with the highest number of country-specific scholarships. They are not for diversity market necessarily. They are for markets that are more traditional markets where I think universities are looking to the re-engagement with this particular traditional and important market. That was a little bit about scholarships, but talking about rankings, what we identify, and it was a lot of conversation about this through the times of COVID, how rankings are not going to be the best for Australia and New Zealand because, the lack of research. Well, that didn't happen. And in fact, Australian and New Zealand universities, they still have a strong position from a ranking point of view. And once again, we identify that the relationship between rankings and the fees is still quite strong. So universities with higher rankings are still this 2023 settling their fees higher in general. It's not every single case, but as you can see here, the trend is kind of clear. And the correlation is quite strong. It's actually correlations of 1% is perfect correlation. We actually have a correlation of 0.84, which is actually very, very strong. Now, in the topic of rankings and fees, which we have been following for about 5 years, and we have seen how this relationship has always been strong, what I think we need to consider is what it could happen in the next few years. It seems that we are actually changing a little bit of the narrative that exists in Australia. And if you think about it, probably 15 years ago, the narrative of Australia as a study destination was strongly focused on lifestyle. That was about 15 years ago. Then it changed to quality education. And with the changes done by the Australian government, it's changing a little bit more to employability and graduate outcomes. And as a result of that, and I'm not saying this is going to change quickly, but it might change in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe this relationship with rankings, which is related to quality education, could change. And what we are going to see is probably that fees could align more to some sort of graduate outcomes. Now, I'm raising this because we already have seen that this happen in certain discipline areas. When we look at the relationship between the fees and the rankings for areas like education and nursing, the correlation is not that strong. Actually, let's just go back and I can show you. It was 0.84 in general. For these two particular areas are actually 0.41, which still shows that there is a relationship, but definitely is not as strong. Now, I think what basically this is showing us is that this group of students not necessarily care that much about a particular ranking for nursing of education. What they want is that graduate outcome, that professional certification, that employability, those courses that gives them those tools, really just to have that professional success that they are seeking. So this could actually happen in other programs based on changes that the Australian government has announced, and based on the type of candidates that we're actually engaging in. So once again, I don't think this is going to change tomorrow, but we need to keep looking into it. And of course, we'll keep reporting if we see any changes, but it's something to have in mind. And I think it's something that universities will probably find important just to follow for the next set of pricing strategies. Okay. So finally, and I thank you so much for joining this session again. As you can see, we actually, this 2023, we had experienced a really big change in the pricing position from the universities. And this is due to the fact that we still had to carry some of the effects of COVID-19. We also have to add the fact that we had favorable market conditions finally. And as a result of the combination of both, a lot of universities had to do some big adjustments, which is changing significantly the relative position that university has from a pricing point of view, which is not only from a general perspective, also at the specific discipline areas we have seen that there has been some big adjustments done. And I invite you just to take the time just to look so you can actually see if that pricing position is exactly where you want to be, but also very importantly to look if the competitors that you have from a pricing point of view are exactly the same that you had before, or most likely this is the case, are actually different. So you can adjust your strategies more accordingly to the new environment that we have from a pricing point of view. And as a result of this big adjustment, the only thing that we can expect is that it will be more adjustments ahead. I think that in 2024, universities now finally with clarity, they're going to be able just to really identify where they are. But for that reason, I think it's important just to look at the data, either internally or just any information that you can actually obtain, so you can actually move forward in the next following years with a more consistent approach, because definitely the challenges created by COVID create such a big distortion that we are finally cleaning that up and we are actually moving ahead finally with some clarity. But in order to do that, I think it's important just to understand what's the position that you have from a pricing perspective. Now, just to finish this session, I just want to share with you an old chart that I think is very relevant when we talk about pricing. And it's a chart that basically compare the 2019, this is going before COVID, the 2019 annual international fee of each university versus the revenue that it was generated in that particular year. And as you can see here, there is some sort of a relationship between the actual revenue generated by universities and the fees that they have. Basically, there is a little bit of a relationship between the higher fees versus higher revenue. But it's not necessarily the case in every single data point that we have here. And I think that's important just to tell. For example, we have universities like University of New South Wales, University of Melbourne, and Monash, who actually have a very similar price range, but the results in terms of the number of the revenue generated by international fees is actually quite different. And we see those exceptions all across this particular chart. And I think that this is because we need to remember that although pricing is a very important part of student recruitment strategies, it's just one out of the mix that universities have when they actually put their value proposition towards international applicants. There are things like finding the right program for them. If you have the right program, the right price, and you do the right promotion, yes, that's when probably you're going to see the success in the conversion of international applicants. But price, once again, is just one of many different variables. And I think as we move forward, we need to remember how important it is to put the right institutional efforts to have that right mix that lets you connect with the right group of students. And I just want to do that to finalize as a reminder that I know you are all aware, but I think when you talk about price, it's just very important just to remember that there is more beyond that. And student recruitment strategies, as you know, they are a lot richer and there are many other things that have to be considered. And what we are just aiming is just to look at that particular part, which is price, just to provide some of the highlights. But we are fully aware that there is a lot more when you're actually putting together international student recruitment strategies. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to connect with you. If you have any questions or require more information, please feel free to contact me. And we have all the reports available now for you. You can sometimes probably ask for something specific, or you actually want to have more information about the reports. Feel free to contact us. We're always happy to help. And thank you so much. I know that everybody is very busy, so I really appreciate the time you are taking just to connect with us. And I hope that this key data is useful to support your international student recruitment strategies. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Kerry Ramirez from Studymove, and we'll be in touch very soon with you.